to this Open University webinar, Balancing Sustainability and Resilience in association with the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. Thanks for joining us today. Before we meet our panel, I'd like to ask Liz Ponting, Sector Specialist for Transport and Logistics at the Open University, to introduce the session.
Thank you very much, Ed. So I've worked in higher education over the last 20 or so years. In the last 8 years, however, I've worked in building relationships between universities and businesses to promote knowledge sharing. With a global pandemic and the reality of Brexit now upon the UK, what does that mean in the world of supply chain, and can it really be sustainable? Today, I really want to see if the academic theories are working in practice or if there are takeaways from both sides. Ultimately, however, I want you as the audience to leave this webinar feeling better equipped at tackling these supply chain issues within your organisation. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat box and I'll do my best to answer them throughout the discussion.
Thanks. We'll hear more from Liz later, but now I'd like to ask the panellists to introduce themselves. Nicoletta, let's start with you.
So I'm Nicoletta Tipi. I'm senior lecturer in the area of operations and supply chain at the Open University.
Ian, over to you.
So I'm Ian Clough. I'm the managing director for transport within DHL Supply Chain in the UK and Ireland. I've got a 30 plus year experience in the logistics industry, working in UK, mainland Europe, in the USA for a while, and also in Asia very briefly. So, broad experience of logistics and supply chain, and working for one of the biggest employers globally and one of the biggest global supply chains. Sustainability is a critical thing for us. So that's why I'm here.
And lastly, Nick.
Hi, my name is Nick McCulloch. I'm a managing director for DFDS, Europe's largest shipping and logistics company. Yes, plenty of years of experience. I graduated from the University of Ulster. And then since then I've built my career. I look after the business unit in Northern Ireland, and specialise mostly in retail logistics and transport.
Great, thank you very much. Now, Nicoletta, can you tell us more about your research and expertise?
My research is in the area of supply chain modeling, supply chain performance measurement system, and supply chain complexity and analysis linked to complexity. Now, this research interest has started with my work at the University of Sheffield, where I researched on a project on production control tools for manufacturing and supply chain systems using simulation techniques. Then I continued this type of work in industry, where I took a position in the area of supply chain with Unilever. So during the time spent in industry, I learned a lot about supply chain, business analytics, data management. Over the years, I also had the opportunity at the University of Huddersfield, where I worked for the past 16 years, to work with a number of projects with case studies from various industries in transport, manufacturing, retailing, healthcare, situated around the world, where sustainability aspects have been considered, for example, analysis from a product design point of view and how this has an effect on sustainability, from developing performance measures about to report on sustainability, from supply chain design, looking at how supply chain clusters can bring benefits on resilience and sustainability. And now, since I joined Open University last year in October, I am trying to continue this work in supply chain area, supply chain modeling, supply chain sustainability.
So, Nicoletta, when we talk about sustainability, what do you mean?
So in terms of sustainability, so if we try to put a short definition to sustainability, this may be probably more challenging. And the reason I'm saying this is due to the complexity of the supply chain system. So if I am to put this in the context of supply chain, this is referring to the fact that supply chains are so complex with many actors being part of the chain with various levels of interaction and decisions from suppliers to their services, transportation, manufacturers, warehouses, retailers, consumers. So considering sustainability in this context, it's referring to supply chain sustainability where actions of all these players in the chain are coming together and they integrate to deliver products and services that are considered in analysis not only from an economic point of view, but also from an environmental and social point of view. So from an economic point of view, being able to operate over a period of time, it is important. From an environmental point of view, is to maintain a green agenda, minimize, reduce harmful impact to the environment. Where from a social perspective, to have up-to-date, for example, skills, knowledge, training, meeting and maintaining human needs and aspirations. So this is where I see, in a way, a definition for the supply chain sustainability, but it is probably way more than this.
That's great, Nicoletta. Ian, over to you. Why do you think, why is sustainability important for your organisation? And are there any specific initiatives that DHL's developed?
Yeah, so I think at DHL we're part of Deutsche Post, or Deutsche Post DHL. We're the 11th largest employer globally, private employer globally, and as I said before, one of the largest logistics companies in the world. So being sustainable is an integral part of our role, and making decisions which improve things as we move forward, not just financially, but also for our other key stakeholders in terms of our employees and our customer base, and for the environment in general, is incredibly important to us. So, it's a major initiative that we have, and within those stakeholder groups, it's becoming increasingly important. So when I think about my business, I think about the employees and the changing nature of our employees, and the increasing level of importance of the environment, and what are we as a business doing about the environment to improve things is increasingly important. I look at it from a customer perspective. So more and more often now, customers are becoming really more serious about their environmental considerations in bids and tender documents, etc., etc. Where it would have been 5-10 years ago, it might have been question number 25, and you had to make a phrase against it. Now, actually, it's genuinely making a difference in terms of the selection of suppliers. And then ultimately, in terms of our bottom line, as a logistics business, one of the most critical success factors is elimination of waste. And if we can eliminate waste in our supply chain, then that will ultimately make us more profitable, more attractive, and a better business to do business with, and ultimately be more successful. So that's why it's really important in terms of our business. The transport aspects of our business. We also have warehousing and all those things, but the transport aspect is really where the impact of sustainability comes in. And there are some really clever technical things, sustainable fuels in aviation, which will have a big impact. In terms of the UK and Irish business that I look after on the transport side, a lot of it is about being more efficient with the assets that we have. So improving our networking, reducing the amount of empty running, which has a significant impact in terms of our efficiency, but also reduces the impact on the environment. Utilizing assets which are very efficient from a fuel utilization perspective. So we consistently renew our fleet, even though they may well be diesel vehicles or traditionally aspirated vehicles. They become significantly more efficient every new generation of vehicle. And then the third aspect of it is really looking at the alternative fuel technologies. So as a group, in Deutsche Post, we'll invest about 7 billion euros between now and 2030. And we have a significant target to reduce our carbon emissions during that period of time. But one of the concrete things we've been doing in the UK is we are investing in a fleet of over 500 alternative fuel HGV vehicles, so primarily gas vehicles, for our primary delivery activities. And then we recently invested in a 16-ton fully electric HGV, which is operating in London, where, whilst the carbon emissions are a critical part of our objectives, we've also got to bear in mind particulates and noise pollution, etc., particularly in the major cities. So we have a 16-ton fully electric vehicle operating in London, which quite frankly is a bit of R&D because it's not a great economic solution at the moment. But as things progress, particularly in the cities, we see sort of electricity becoming more important as a provider because of the particulates and the noise pollution. But we don't really see it yet as an alternative in terms of the motorway long distance. So that's where gas, and in particular biogas, is going to become more important. So that just a couple of examples, and there's, I could talk about it forever, but there's a lot of things going on.
Fascinating. Let's move to Nick. Nick, why is sustainability important for DFDS?
Yeah, I mean, acting responsibly and sustainable, it's in our DNA. The nature of our business demands it. We've over 8,500 employees, and circa 45% of them, are in high risk. Those working at ports, those working in our warehouse and transport operations. And, we are a significant shipping company, and to be sustainable, it's no secret we burn quite a lot of fuel. So we need to be careful about how we use our 700,000 tonnes of fuel every year. And in recent years, the scope of our responsibility has expanded. So, reducing our impact to climate change and ensuring a diverse and inclusive workplace is key, and then that obviously would lead into certain initiatives that we are putting in place currently.
So, what sort of things have you developed around sustainability?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, we've set a target. So our target is 45% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. And certain elements around that I'll touch on. And we just recently set a goal to have our first carbon-free vessel by 2025. I mean, really, the first one, to remain sustainable, is about protecting marine life. So sustain ocean life, reducing emissions into the sea, and support marine research and education. And that can be from the ensure in the next 10 years we have zero oil spills. We've installed ballast water treatment systems to avoid the transport of invasive species, and we've been working with the Orca Wildlife Monitoring Programme since 2006. And then improving air quality, so we need to operate at a more environmentally friendly and efficient way to reduce emissions of CO2 and sulphur and other parties. Our ferry fuel consumption is falling steadily, and we've made great progress this first quarter compared to last year, with emissions down 4%. And as we've touched on already, our target for 45% reduction in emissions per mile by 2030. And that falls in line with some of our key customers. One of our biggest customers, when we look at, would be Volvo. So we work closely with them, investing in new equipment similar to DHL, and we're also trialling autonomous shunter vehicles at ports, fully electric. In terms of our vessels, 23 of our vessels, we've installed scrubbers, which is to reduce the sulphur of coming from those boats. So not only are new ships that are coming on board of 6, they come with that installed, and we're retrofitting all our other ships. The other piece that keeps us sustainable is that many of the ships that most people would see, particularly cruise ships coming into ports, many of them will have to run their engine almost at a tick-over speed is what it's called, but we want to move that to electric. So many of our ships, when they do arrive at ports that are compatible, then we switch to electric and we switch the emissions off. And then we want to be a responsible neighbour. So we want to contribute to a cleaner environment by reducing pollution, waste, noise and light to the communities where we operate. So replacing petrol and diesel cars with hybrid and electric. I've literally just about to receive an electric car myself from the company. So that's a business unit, and simple initiatives, but that will help us keep remain sustainable. Reducing single use of plastics on passenger ferries. So our passenger business, when it gets up and running, we aim to reduce plastic use there. A target to reduce land-based electricity per employee by 25% with different initiatives. So not only looking at our employees, looking at our business, and then reaching out to our customers. Many of our customers are setting targets, and we need to fall in line with that. And that's a key initiative for ourselves at DFDS.
Let's move the discussion on to resilience. What do we mean by resilience?
So again, resilience is the ability to maintain the functions, operations of a supply chain system by depending on the way the system adapts as conditions vary over time. So if we have a supply chain as a system, and this system has been disturbed, and now these disturbances could be, let's say, traffic congestions, delay in delivery, resource limitations, to disturbances generated by shutting down a factory. So the resilience is the system ability to return to a normal operating performance within an acceptable period of time. And supply chain resilience is an operational capability that enables a disturbed or a broken supply chain to reconstruct itself and be stronger than before.
So Nick, what changes have you had to make during COVID to be resilient?
Yeah, I mean, I think like everyone, the last year or so has probably been the most challenging for everyone, both on a personal perspective and a work perspective. On top of COVID, obviously we had Brexit, and when we think about how we quickly had to react, we have a fast-moving supply chain. We have two businesses technically, a passenger business and a transport and logistics business, and both work completely different. And when you're in a big business, everyone has to adapt. And from a resilience perspective, when we go back to the starting point, we're almost we came to a complete standstill. What we had to really do was reinvent how we did business, reinvent how we engage with our colleagues, how we reinvent with our customers, because probably what was a good thing in terms of the build resilience is that everyone was in the same position. So it's not like a logistical problem where we come together as logisticians and say this is the problem. We were all in it. So we had to come up with a new strategy. We had to come up with new ways of working. And the first thing that we really did was listen, work together, and adapt. And that meant everyone. We went from one point of everyone in an office, everyone in a port, everyone at a ferry terminal, to most people working from home. And we had to really re-engage with our colleagues, re-engage with every level of customer, every level of management. And to be able to do that, it really was just about listen. engage with every person and work towards an almost new way of working. And I think as that transpired, we worked together better, and we came up with making sure, particularly with resilience, making sure there was a work-life balance, because we all probably seen it at the start. When you were working from home, there was no off switch. It wasn't like you had this pressure that it was, I must work. And I think that was the case. And we can stand here now and say we have some amazing colleagues who went 24/7, to make sure that we got through this pandemic and got through, they changed their supply chain, they changed their passenger business. So I think it really was about, working with every colleague, identifying work-life balance, and then making sure that we survive, because at the end of the day, you have a business to run, and when the revenue isn't there and the passengers aren't there and the customers there, many of our customers just cease trading depending on the sector. It was about how do we win every battle day by day, but come out stronger. And I think we've done, I don't think there's an exact recipe at the moment. I think on reflection, that's what we're doing now. We're looking back and say, what did we do good? What did we do bad? Did we treat our colleagues with respect? Did we care for them? Did we look after customers? And that will form a strategy for moving forward to come out of this and really build resilience, because for me, that's what it's about now. It's about not looking back so much as a business, because we can't do that. Build a strategy and then reflect on some point on all the good things that we did as a business.
Very interesting. Ian, why has resilience been part of your thinking throughout COVID?
I think it's been an incredibly challenging time, and both on a personal level for our employees in the UK, but also our customer base and for the business as a whole. So I think we were in a strange situation, because across our business, where we cover so many sectors, we have life science and healthcare sector, where at the start of the pandemic was absolutely going crazy, and we were looking for capacity. We had a business that delivers beer and wine into about half the pubs in the UK, so they were doing absolutely nothing. We have supermarket businesses that were going absolutely crazy at one point, and they were an integral part of the sort of the day-to-day life, so it's critical to keep those supply chains moving. And then at the same time, you're trying to manage that with the considerations that you have around your workforce, how you keep them safe, the concerns that they have on a day-to-day life. Yeah, so we do a lot of home delivery business in a sort of two-man approach, which is delivering large items into family homes and those sort of things. So can you still have two people in a vehicle? Just getting hold of equipment to clean and to protect the employees, all of those things that had never really been the most important thing on our priority list soon just appeared right at the top of the priority list. And then how do we take care of probably we had about 30% roughly of our workforce furloughed at some point. So how do you manage that? Out of 40,000 employees in the UK and Ireland, you're trying to manage a group of people who are on furlough. You're trying to manage literally tens of thousands of people, as Nick said, who are working from home in a very strange environment. And as an executive in that business, you're generally in quite a fortunate position where to work from home, I can go to my office or the top of the house, I can shut the door, and I'm in quite a reasonable sort of environment to work. But we had lots of people who, potentially did incredible things working, sitting on the end of their bed or, with a laptop on their knee, and just the amount of effort and the amount of extraordinary effort that the employees put in was just incredible. And what we were able to do during the pandemic, where a massive organization, there's always sort of friction and getting parts of the business to work well together. all of a sudden, all that friction disappeared. So, when we were challenged in terms of delivering toilet roll for supermarkets, when that went crazy right at the start of the pandemic, we had a whole load of drivers and a whole load of warehouse staff who had been working in our trade team to the beer and spirits delivery organisation that we were able to, on a Saturday afternoon, call in, and they appeared, either to take trucks out or to work in the warehouse. So I think it taught us so many things around resilience that, if you can get a workforce which is generally really engaged and particularly around customers and particularly around doing the right thing for the country as a whole, and then you've also got those common standards and processes which allow people, even if they work in different places, they can sort of easily adapt and easily move across different sectors of the business. So it was a crazy time, as Nick said. I think the employees did a phenomenal job, and without them, I think we would have really struggled to achieve things. And people going above and beyond was just absolutely incredible. And I think one of the things that it's one of the positives it's left us with is a number of those bonds that were built when, people who work in one sector have only ever worked in that sector. All of a sudden they were working in retail, or they were helping out in life sciences, or we were delivering PPE to care homes, or whatever it was. A lot of those relationships have stayed the test of time now. So now as people have started to go back to normal, those relationships are still there. And that will make us a much more resilient business as we go forward. Yeah.
So, Nicoletta, what challenges has COVID posed to the transport and logistics sector in terms of their resilience, do you think?
So, in terms of its resilience, it is particularly important if we do have a clear understanding of how to define resilience. And if we have the performance measures or up-to-date performance measures, they really capture the resilience in this sector. Another interesting part is that resilience and with COVID, we do see a number of fluctuations. So customers are putting different demand on the supply chain. So this level of fluctuations created a particular challenge that we do need to understand how to work with this type of challenge.
Now, Nicoletta, I've got a challenging question for you. Why might resilience impact on an organisation's sustainability efforts?
So, for example, to be environmentally sustainable, you are looking to save the resources you have, to reduce the amount of damage to the environment, to reduce the waste you send into the landfill. Where to be resilient in the time of crisis, you are looking to ensure that you have accumulated more resources or inventory that you have, that you will then create a bottleneck in the chain. However, short term, there will be the benefit of coping through critical situations. But the question is, what do we see it as long term? So I believe sustainability and resilience are particularly important, not only to understand how our actions and operations have an effect on the environment, but also how everything in the supply chain links together.
Now, I've got a big question for you and Ian, for Ian and Nick now. In the era of Brexit and COVID, why is it difficult for your organisations to balance these priorities effectively? So, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, and if I take a look at 2021 and to touch on Brexit, I can only explain Brexit in particular for Northern Ireland, that on the 31st of December, when we walked out and turned the lights off and came in on the 1st of January, it was a new business. It really was. New procedures, new ways of working. But that also builds resilience because, again, just like COVID, it was a challenge and we've got over it. I don't really want to reflect on how January was because it was that difficult. But on the other hand, that becomes the priority. So, of course, very easy to set a target, very easy to set an objective. And I'm sure we do that in business. But when you have significant changes, then you have to adapt, you have to change and work your priorities. And of course, resource is a big one because, if we take a look at now with the easing of lockdown, we have two businesses, and what we've seen is our freight trade in the last month has went up by 12%. So that sector of the business is cheering and clapping, and with that becomes resource issues. So Ian will know driver shortages, fleet shortages, the production of trucks. I made an inquiry today about bringing in new trucks, and the salesman looked at me, nodded his head in the way I did not want him to, and said, "Good luck, your next new truck will probably be Q1 22. So I'm thinking that is a resource product that I can normally get within 6 weeks because I'm a big customer. I'm being told. So there's an immediate priority. And then people, our next big challenge is that within our passenger business, our passenger numbers are down 79% year on year. And when people start to travel, then all their terminals start to open up. We need to bring up. So that's another priority. So balancing, and at the end of the day, we're a business and the revenue and margin needs to be there regardless of what we do. But we are not a company that would put something down on paper and say we will reduce CO2 emissions. We will be a more recurring employer. We take health and well-being very serious. So yeah, listen, these challenges have came at us, we've came out of them, and again, we will learn from them and adapt to them. And that's what we are all experts at, and that's why many of our customers lean on us to make sure that's what we deliver on. And for sure, it's been a bumpy road, a very bumpy road at times, but that's why we're sitting here today, because we learn from it, we adapt, and then we apply. And, sharing knowledge is a big thing, because I'm not the expert all the time. Someone else might have a better idea. Another company, I think, Ian will touch on it. We've reached out to DHL, we've reached out to other companies because we may not have the answer. And why reinvent the wheel? DHL could be doing something better than us. We could be doing something better than them. But it's not about that. It's about working together. And really, the impacts that we have as a business, we just change and adapt and keep everything. It's like juggling the balls. We have to juggle the balls in business, and really learn and make sure we stay on a steady path. And that can come in many different formats and many different challenges.
And Ian, what about you?
Yeah, I think the combination of factors last year, the COVID, Brexit, some of the other recent changes which are occurring around taxation rules for drivers and IR35, all these things have basically come to challenge us. And I guess the biggest overriding issue. So once we've talked about, look, we're going to keep our people safe, we're going to make sure that we continue to support those critical supply chains of the UK, so the ones in food retail and those sort of things. The critical things are the complete lack of certainty. So you've honed your supply chain over years, months, with your customers, working hand in glove to become as efficient as possible, to take waste out of the supply chain, and it's just a continuous drive for improvement. And then you're now in an environment where one day you are closed, completely closed, and then within a very short period of time, you are operating not even at 100%. You're operating at 120, 140%. So some of the non-food retailers that we have as customers in the UK, they are doing record days sales now. Yeah, record ever. Yeah, not sort of like a record for the last month or whatever, but they're beating their record projections by more than 20%. So all of a sudden you've got a situation in the middle of May where traditionally you'd have a relatively stable supply chain with reasonable access to key resources like trucks and drivers. As Nick says, the issues elsewhere in the supply chain around chips that are causing issues around vehicles, to be the availability of vehicles. All those things are sort of come together, and you're in this place where you've got more volume than even a normal peak would be in a period of in the middle of the year, and nobody's really certain how long it's going to be, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we've had to adapt to. So, how long is this retail peak going to last? And depending on who you speak to, you can get 10 different answers. Yeah, you speak to 10 people, you get 10 different answers. That all the customers are in different places. And I think that's why the logistics industry, the logistics professionals, like Nick and my team and the other guys out there in the business world, that's where we come to the fore, because, as Nick said, the logistics guys just make it happen somehow. And the sacrifices that people put in, and in the end, I think it'll make us more resilient, because industry hasn't seen fluctuations like this. I don't know, maybe ever, or maybe it was, you had to go back to wartime or something like that to see these type of fluctuations. And we saw in our business a lot of the inherent friction in a big business just went away. Decisions were made quickly. Whether it was for the benefit of employees, whether it was for the benefit of customers, whether it was to do the right thing in terms of protecting the financial performance of the business. But all of a sudden, all those things were possible, which in a normal period, were challenging, frustrating, and those sort of things. And I think those are the things that we've got to try and hang on to as we come out of the pandemic, and as we get through Brexit. Yeah, we can all be incredibly frustrated about lack of clarity around rules and challenges with legislation and those type of things. But in the end, as we get to that solution, the only way the business will ultimately be able to function and supply chain will be able to support society as a whole is to make the supply chain run in the same way that it has done before. So whether it's paperwork requirements, whether it's whatever the controls and restrictions are, the logistics organizations in the end will work out their way around it. They'll work out their way through it so that they can be compliant. But we still need to meet the demands in terms of the speed of supply chains that we've always had, because I think the demand from customers isn't going to change. It's not going to go back 30 years and say, I'm very happy, going and doing my monthly shop and doing it once. I mean, people, the whole industry has changed, and now you want to be able to order your food and get it delivered that evening, buy a pair of jeans and have them by Friday for your night out, etc., etc. That the world has changed, and I don't see that going back. I think it's just really how it's going to force the logistics organizations to respond quicker and to adapt to those new environments.
Excellent, thank you. Now, this is my last question for you. What practical tip would you give the audience who are considering ways to balance sustainability and resilience for their organisation? Nick, you first.
Yeah, I mean, probably two. I think the first one's maintain perspective. Learn from your setbacks, focus on solutions, and manage negative thinking. And there's there's a lot in there. But if you think of the challenges that we've all had, you want to give your best and you want to give 110%, but we're all human. We can all make mistakes. We never have. We don't always have the right answer. And what we've seen is, with resilience and working together as a team, we definitely get a lot more. And as I've already touched on, we are human, and both. We have to remember that, and I think we've all seen it, is that there is much more about your personal life, much more about balance, and much more. I know more about many of my colleagues that I never knew, whether that been through a Zoom call on a Friday night, and we've all done it, the quiz, the drinks. People laughed at that, but you learn so much from that, and then when you do make a mistake, when you're in that environment and someone challenges you or tell you you've made a mistake and it comes across negative, because you're in an environment where you're sitting in your own house, you're in a room, you can take that pretty bad. But please, maintain perspective, because it's not about that. You've seen on a one-to-one perspective, you can take things, translate it differently to being in a collective meeting room, to being in. So that's important. The big one for me, and I know you only asked for one, but the second one, building networks. Use your social support both personally and in work, because again, without reaching out to each other and not being the enclosed, DFDS, we're the best, we're the only, we do everything brilliant, no one else does it as good as that. That's the old way. The new way is reaching out, adapting, talking to each other. How did you do that? How did we do this? Can we work together? And making sure that all comes together, because we've all been in this together. We've all, touch wood, came out of it, and we can learn from that. But that was done by, at home, running something by my wife. Many of times my wife probably listening into a Zoom call, she's a solicitor, and saying, what have you just talked about for the last hour? Transport, logistics, shipping. And I've had to do the same. And then in work, that network, where there has been times where it's been, how do I do this? How do I come out of this challenge? And it's pick up another customer, a competitor who we would never have reached out to before. And I think all of that makes you realise, one, we've been in it together. Two, there's many other solutions out there. There's no right way, there's no wrong way of doing things. And for sure, lean on the person beside you, the person above you, the person below you. It does not matter, because I think everyone mucked in, went to the coalface, and got us where we are today. And I think that has paid dividend, and will pay dividend in the future, because that's what it's about, working together.
Ian, your one tip.
So for me, it would be it'd be about communication and engagement with your team, with your employees as a whole. We would never have got through it without their support, their going the extra mile, their additional effort, and don't underestimate the value of that. And the value of investing that time, or it's not always the great technical solutions or the massive infrastructure investments. It's having those people, as I referred to when myself and the head of HR were helping out in one of the warehouses on a Saturday at the start of the pandemic. And being able to make a phone call and have 20 people, and it was almost like the cavalry coming. You saw 2 minibuses turn up and then 20 people get out, and you think, wow, now we are going to be able to get, these 5 guys in these trucks, and they'll get that out, and then we can clean, sort out this pick over here. And that doesn't come from a process. That doesn't come from an instruction or a negotiation with a union or whatever. That comes from engagement of people. Yeah, every single one of those people was not rostered to be working that day. They were, but they all, because of their engagement, because of their relationships that they had, because of their desire to do the right thing, all didn't even think about it and just stepped up and helped. And I think that is, in all of this stuff, that's really the priceless bit. There's a lot of technical things which happened. There's a lot of really great stuff and good investments and all those things. But actually, the power of the engagement of the employee base and being able to bring those people together, that's the thing that really makes many times the impossible possible.
And Nicoletta, what's your tip?
So as a practical tip, I would say it is so important to consider sustainability and resilience, or give consideration to sustainability and resilience at the design phase. So where this design phase refers to a product design or a process design or a service or a supply chain, it is so important to incorporate this sustainability considerations, as well as resilience. Having a good understanding of what sustainability is and what resilience is, and how you are able to measure this, so have clear performance measures design, linked to sustainability, linked to resilience, that will allow a process designer, for example, or a product designer to incorporate aspects of resilience, aspects of sustainability in their design. For example, for a product, when this product is being designed, do we have an understanding of whether this product can be recycled or can be returned into the supply chain? What expectations do we have for this particular product to come back into the supply chain, not to end into the landfill? Just as one example.
Thanks so much for those tips. I'm sure everybody watching will find them very useful indeed. With that, I'd like to thank the panel for such a great discussion and bring this session to a close. But first, Liz, how can the audience get in touch for further details?
Well, firstly, thank you, Ed, and thank you to the panellists today. I think there were some really, really interesting things to take away here. It's obvious that sustainability and resilience is a very complex issue. Having the right measures in place to analyse their effectiveness is crucial. So implementing sustainable efforts should be done at, I think the key thing was the design stage, to ensure that future-proofing happens along the supply chain. So part of the design plan should absolutely include training of staff to ensure they are equipped to adapt to changes, as well as investment in new technologies. So with all that in mind, if you'd like to find out how the OU can support you with this, then please do email me at the address shown on this screen, or do connect with me on LinkedIn. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Liz, and thanks to our audience. Goodbye.